If you are a median earner here in the United States and you're saving, 10 to 15% of your income in a standard retirement account, you're basically mathematically agreeing to a very specific transaction.
Right. A transaction most people don't even realize they're making.
Exactly. You are agreeing to spend roughly 9,000 of the best days of your life sitting in traffic, sitting in a cubicle, attending mandatory status meetings, all for this incredibly distant promise of retiring at 65.
Which is a massive chunk of your life.
It's your prime. And today, we are going to show you how to buy those 9,000 days back. And we're actually going to map out exactly how to do it in under 10 years.
It is a totally radical proposition. I mean, especially when you consider that the default American dream is, well, it's essentially a script written for a completely different era, right?
100%.
The whole expectation of, going to a good school, securing a steady job, buying a nice single-family home in the suburbs, that entire trajectory hinges on an economy that literally requires you to remain a dependable consuming participant for the vast majority of your adult life.
Yeah, the system needs you to keep buying things.
Right. The entire infrastructure of modern consumerism relies on the average person never actually achieving financial independence until they are, frankly, too old to disrupt the system.
Which basically transforms that traditional assembly line of success into a treadmill. You keep running, the speed keeps increasing with inflation and, lifestyle creep, and you're just trading the highest energy years of your life to wage-paying work.
Yeah, it's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. But we're speaking directly to you, the listener, today because we are completely deconstructing that treadmill. We're doing a deep dive into a massive stack of notes, historical market data, and the core blueprint laid out by Scott Trench in his book, Set for Life.
Such a phenomenal breakdown in that book.
It really is. And we are setting a highly specific baseline for this deep dive today. We are taking a hypothetical median wage earner, so someone making around $50,000 a year with absolutely zero in savings, and we're going to mathematically prove out a realistic path to permanent, untouchable financial freedom before a decade passes.
And to ground this right out of the gate, I mean, we have to clarify that this isn't some law of attraction, manifest your wealth kind of thing.
Right. No vision boards here.
No vision boards. And it's not about launching a zero-down real estate empire overnight based on some guy's TikTok video.
Yeah, please don't do that.
It is an analytical, borderline ruthless approach to your personal resource allocation. What Trench does so brilliantly is he treats personal finance not as a series of, cute budgeting tips, but as a literal corporate restructuring of your own life.
Like a turnaround CEO coming in.
Exactly. We're looking at a progression that moves someone from absolute zero to $25,000 in liquid net worth, and then leverages that exact capital to hit $100,000, and finally scales that up to permanently replace their wage income.
I always think of the traditional retirement path, like deciding to ride a bicycle from New York to California.
That's a brutal mental image.
Right. I mean, if you pedal diligently for 40 years, you probably will eventually hit the West Coast.
Yeah.
But your knees will be completely shot, you'll be utterly exhausted, and you'll have spent 4 decades just, staring at the asphalt.
Yeah, you get there, but at what cost?
Exactly. This blueprint, what we're talking about today, is about building a sports car instead. It requires intensive, really hard time in the garage up front, but once you turn the key, you reach the destination while you actually have the vitality to enjoy it.
I love that analogy.
But, to build that engine, we have to start with the absolute most difficult phase, which is the initial capital accumulation. Because before anyone can, invest like Warren Buffett or start scaling a company like Jeff Bezos, they need cash.
You have to have capital to play the game.
Right. And this exposes a massive flaw in modern hustle culture advice for the average 9-to-5 worker.
Oh, the grind culture stuff drives me crazy. Because the flaw is cognitive and physical exhaustion. The modern financial media landscape is just saturated with motivational speakers telling salaried employees that, their problem is a scarcity mindset.
That you just have to want it more.
Right, that they just need to tap into infinite earning potential, launch a side hustle, sleep 4 hours a night, and outwork the competition. But that advice completely, totally ignores the biological reality of the person receiving it.
It's just not sustainable.
Not at all. Look, if you are making $50,000 a year, you are likely commuting an hour, working 8 to 9 hours, and then commuting back. By the time you finally sit down on your couch at 7 o'clock at night, your executive function is completely depleted.
Which means the advice to just go start a business in your free time is setting people up for absolute failure.
Mathematically, yes.
Because if I'm trying to build a competitive, I don't know, an e-commerce brand or a consulting gig from 8 p.m. to midnight, I am going head-to-head with well-capitalized full-time entrepreneurs who are dedicating 100% of their optimal cognitive hours to the exact same market.
You're bringing a butter knife to a gunfight.
Literally. The failure rate there isn't just high, it's practically guaranteed by the constraints of time and human energy. So the math dictates that you have to buy your time back before you can effectively deploy it into high-leverage earning opportunities.
And that is the bedrock of this entire philosophy. You simply cannot out-earn a structural deficit when you are starting from zero and you have no time. The first $25,000 you accumulate is the hardest money you will ever make in your entire life.
Without a doubt.
And it must be generated through intense strategic frugality. Not because being frugal is the end goal, right? Nobody wants to pinch pennies forever. But because that 25 grand buys you what we call a financial runway.
A runway. Let's unpack that term.
It is the personal equivalent of seed funding for a Silicon Valley startup.
Okay, so let's map that runway out for the listener. If a person can structure their life so their essential overhead is, say, $2,000 a month, so $24,000 a year, then saving $25,000 equates to purchasing more than a full year of complete autonomy.
A full year where you don't answer to anyone.
Right. It's a year where you literally don't need a paycheck to survive.
And the optionality that provides, it is staggering. Because without a runway, you are a hostage to your own expenses every month.
You're trapped.
Completely. Think about it. If a phenomenal opportunity crosses your desk, let's say, joining an early-stage startup that offers 15% less in base salary, but incredible, massive equity upside. Or maybe taking a commission-based role with a huge ceiling.
A person with zero savings and high overhead simply cannot accept that job.
Exactly. They have to pass on asymmetrical wealth opportunities because they need next Friday's paycheck just to clear the mortgage. The runway removes that existential dread of risk.
And this really flips the script on that whole saving versus earning debate, especially when you factor in the U.S. tax code.
Oh, the tax math makes this undeniable.
Because we operate in a system where active labor is penalized heavily through taxation, but wealth preservation is virtually untouched. The government doesn't tax the capital you retain by optimizing your lifestyle.
The friction of taxation on active income is, frankly, one of the most misunderstood hurdles for the working class in America. Let's just run the numbers on a median earner.
Let's do it.
When you combine federal income tax, state tax, and FICA payroll taxes, that individual is looking at a marginal tax rate hovering somewhere around 30%.
Roughly a third of every new dollar.
Right. So if they decide to take on a second job, maybe they drive for Uber or they grind for a $5,000 annual bonus at their corporate job, they do not see $5,000 in their bank account.
No, they see maybe $3,500 after the government takes its cut. So if I want to actually increase my deployable net worth by a clean $5,000, I have to earn over $7,000 in gross income to make that happen.
And earning an extra $7,000 takes hundreds of hours of additional exhausting labor.
Conversely, if you engineer a way to cut $5,000 from your annual housing or transportation costs, that capital is purely after-tax wealth.
It's yours. You retain every single cent. Mathematically, for someone in that median tax bracket, a penny saved isn't just a penny earned. A penny saved is roughly 1.3 pennies earned.
A 33% premium just for saving instead of earning.
Yes. Early in the wealth building process, capital preservation is roughly 33% more efficient than income generation. It's just a structural reality.
And that reality makes chasing a small raise look incredibly inefficient compared to just doing a rigorous audit of your own life. But I know the counter-argument here is super obvious. The word frugality, it triggers a visceral reaction for a lot of people.
He definitely has a branding problem.
It implies a life of deprivation.
Right.
Like sitting in a freezing apartment, eating cold beans out of a can, and alienating all your friends because you won't split a dinner bill. So how does this blueprint separate strategic capital accumulation from a miserable scarcity mindset?
By entirely ignoring the trivial expenses that financial gurus on TV love to shame people over. True frugality isn't about performing this daily exercise in willpower by walking past a Starbucks.
The famous latte factor.
Right, the latte factor. It's
Mm.
nonsense. Willpower is a finite resource. If you burn through it to deny yourself a $3 coffee at 8 a.m., you won't have the cognitive bandwidth left at 3 p.m. to negotiate a $10,000 raise.
That makes total sense.
Instead, we have to look at the macroeconomic data of the American consumer. Roughly 80% of the average American's after-tax income is incinerated by just 5 major categories.
Just 5.
5. Housing, which takes up a massive 33%. Transportation at 17%. Food at 13%. Personal insurance and pensions at 11%. And healthcare at roughly 8%.
Wow. Okay, so that means the remaining 20% covers literally everything else in human existence.
Everything. Entertainment, apparel, hobbies, gifts. They are statistically insignificant slivers of the pie. So when talking heads on cable news berate millennials for buying avocado toast or a nice pair of sneakers, they are fixating on a variable expense category that represents maybe 3 to 5% of a person's total financial output.
It's a total distraction.
It is the financial equivalent of trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon while completely ignoring a massive hole in the hull. You have to attack the fixed structural inefficiencies in your life.
I look at it like corporate bloat. You have to treat your personal finances like the supply chain of a Fortune 500 company. I mean, think about Amazon. Amazon didn't achieve a $1 trillion market cap by telling their warehouse managers to reuse paper clips.
Exactly.
They optimized their massive logistics network. For an individual, housing and transportation are your logistics network.
That's a perfect analogy. Let's talk about transportation because the cultural conditioning here in the U.S. is incredibly deep. The default assumption is that you buy a house in a quiet suburb and you just accept a 45-minute or an hour-long commute as the unavoidable cost of doing business.
You want the big yard, you want the space, so you drive.
Right. But there's a blogger, Mr. Money Mustache, who has done some incredible work quantifying the true cost of this commute, and it is catastrophic to wealth accumulation.
Walk me through the math on that.
The destruction is really twofold, financial and temporal. Financially, if you look at the IRS mileage rate, which accounts for gas, rapid depreciation, insurance, and maintenance, it usually sits around 65 cents a mile.
Okay, so every mile driven costs you 65 cents.
Right. If you commute 30 miles each way, so 60 miles a day, you are burning nearly $40 a day just to transport your physical body to a location where you earn money.
$40 a day. That's $800 a month.
Nearly $10,000 a year in post-tax wealth just evaporating through your tailpipe.
That is insane when you contextualize it against the median salary. But you mentioned the temporal cost too, the time.
Which is arguably worse. An hour each way is 10 hours a week. Over a standard working year, that is 500 hours spent sitting in a metal box getting stressed out in traffic.
500 hours. Let me do the math. That is the equivalent of 12 and a half full 40-hour work weeks.
Yes. You are giving up a quarter of your working year for free.
A quarter of the year. If you recovered that time, you could learn complex financial modeling, you could build a consulting network, you could read 50 books on market theory. Or, frankly, you could just sleep and recover your health so you actually perform better at your day job.
Which makes geographic optimization a massive, massive lever. Moving drastically closer to work or relocating to an area where you can bike or walk to your job triggers this cascading positive effect on your finances.
But people always argue that rent closer to the city center is way more expensive.
Yes, the rent or price per square foot in a denser, closer neighborhood might be higher on paper, but when you subtract the $10,000 in commuting costs and you add back the 500 hours of recovered time, it is almost always a net positive for your baseline wealth generation.
It's arbitrage. You are trading a slight increase in one fixed cost for the total elimination of another, plus this massive influx of free time. But optimizing expenses also requires an upgrade in personal capability.
Big time.
The blueprint pushes really hard against our modern reliance on outsourced expertise for just basic life maintenance. We've developed this learned helplessness where the immediate reaction to any physical problem in our homes or our cars is to just pull out a credit card and call a professional.
We have compartmentalized skills to our own detriment. The assumption is that because a plumber or a mechanic has a specialized title, their work is somehow impenetrable to the average person. But let's look at the economics of outsourcing basic tasks.
Yeah, let's look at a typical home repair.
A residential plumber or a handy person is going to charge typically $75 to $150 an hour, and that's not even including the markup on parts.
Now, compare that to our hypothetical median earner making $50,000 a year. Assuming a standard 2,000-hour work year, their gross hourly rate is $25.
And after our 30% tax reduction we talked about, their actual take-home pay is about $17.50 an hour.
So when that median earner pays a plumber $150 for an hour of labor to replace, like a simple toilet valve, they're trading nearly 9 hours of their own life
More than a full working day.
just to buy 1 hour of someone else's time. It is an incredibly lopsided trade. And with the proliferation of high-quality, step-by-step video tutorials online, diagnosing and repairing rudimentary household or automotive issues is entirely accessible.
Entirely. By taking 3 hours on a Saturday to learn the mechanism of a toilet and fix it yourself, you are effectively paying yourself a tax-free rate of $50 to $100 an hour by avoiding that outbound expense.
It really changes your relationship with your environment, doesn't it? You stop being a passive consumer of services and you become an active manager of your assets.
That's a great way to put it.
But there is a huge psychological trap here that prevents people from optimizing these big categories, and it's the American obsession with the best. We are deeply conditioned to believe that settling for anything less than the absolute premium option is somehow a failure of ambition.
Oh, the pursuit of the best is one of the most effective wealth destroyers in the middle class, largely because the marginal utility of premium goods rarely justifies the exponential increase in price. Economists actually refer to these as Veblen goods.
The Veblen goods.
Yeah, items where demand increases as the price increases simply because the higher price tag signals status.
You see this constantly with consumer electronics. Like a perfectly functional, highly rated 4K television might cost $300 at Walmart or Costco. But the flagship model with an OLED screen and imperceptible bezel costs $3,000.
Is the viewing experience objectively 10 times better? Does it provide 10 times the utility to your life? Of course not. The visual difference is marginal, but the capital deployed is astronomical.
And people repeat this exact pattern with smartphones, with vehicles, with home finishes. But, and this is where it gets really sticky, the most insidious and controversial manifestation of this is the pursuit of the best school district.
This one is tough. The motivation stems from a genuine biological desire to provide for one's children, which makes it very difficult for parents to analyze objectively. But the financial and emotional fallout of this pursuit is often devastating to the family unit.
Let's break down the mechanics of that, because this is where the blueprint really challenges societal norms.
Yeah.
How does buying a house in a top-tier school district actually harm the family's wealth and, ironically, their well-being?
It comes down to opportunity cost and forced leverage. The real estate market aggressively prices in the reputation of school districts. A standard 3-bedroom house in the #1 ranked district in a state might command an $800,000 premium coupled with exorbitant property taxes.
So to access that district, parents often have to stretch their debt-to-income ratio to the absolute limit.
Yes, they drain their liquidity for down payment, and they accept a massive immovable monthly liability for the next 30 years.
Which means they are trapped. To service that massive mortgage, they have to maintain high-stress, high-paying jobs. They cannot take entrepreneurial risks. They certainly can't scale back their hours to spend more time with the kids they ostensibly bought the expensive house for.
And they might have to endure that brutal hour-long commute we just talked about because the premier school district is often pushed far out into the wealthy suburbs.
So they never see their kids anyway.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with a family who objectively analyzes the data and chooses the #3 or #4 ranked district. The schools are still statistically excellent. They produce highly capable graduates.
But the housing costs might be 40% lower.
Right. That family retains hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital over a decade. They have drastically lower property taxes. The stress levels in the household are lower because they aren't living on a razor's edge.
Perhaps one parent even uses that financial surplus to transition to part-time work, being physically present when the children get home from school.
Exactly. The family in the 3rd-ranked district is actually buying freedom and time with their children, while the family in the 1st-ranked district bought prestige at the cost of their autonomy.
It's a profound shift in how you evaluate what is truly best for a family's holistic well-being.
It requires a lot of introspection, but the math doesn't lie.
Okay, so we've stopped the bleeding on living expenses. We've rejected the bloat of the best, we're bypassing the plumbers, and we're eliminating the commute. The cash is piling up. But keeping it under a mattress or tying it up in what society tells you is a good investment can actually destroy that wealth. This brings us face to face with the concept of debt and the incredibly dangerous trap of false assets.
Before your capital can be deployed offensively, it has to be protected from systemic wealth destroyers. High-interest consumer debt, specifically credit cards carrying 20% APR or higher, is a literal financial emergency.
It's a five-alarm fire.
Yes, it represents a reverse compounding effect that will outpace almost any investment return you could possibly generate. The strategy here is zero tolerance. You use aggressive methods like the debt snowball to clear it completely before attempting to build a runway.
But the more nuanced danger, the one that catches smart people, lies in the cultural acceptance of good debt.
The narrative of good debt is everywhere in America. We are told that taking out loans to build a credit score, or financing a reliable car to get to work, or taking on massive student loans to further our education are all smart foundational moves.
They're always framed as investments in our future.
But they are framed that way by the institutions that profit off the interest payments.
Right.
The reality is that all debt is a claim on your future labor. Even a low-interest personal loan or a subsidized student loan increases your monthly structural overhead. If you have a $500 student loan payment, your financial runway now requires an additional $6,000 a year just to tread water.
It extends the time you must remain dependent on wage-paying work.
Exactly, which perfectly sets up the three false assets. These are the pillars of middle-class achievement that actually act as financial anchors.
Let's go through them. The first one is straightforward, but really painful for U.S. car culture enthusiasts: the financed automobile.
An automobile is a rapidly depreciating industrial machine. It requires constant inputs of capital insurance, maintenance, fuel, registration just to operate.
Right.
When you finance a new vehicle, you are paying interest on an item that is actively losing a significant percentage of its value the second you drive it off the dealer lot. It is the textbook definition of a liability.
Yet millions of people consider a shiny new car sitting in their driveway a reflection of their net worth.
You're paying a premium to borrow money for a falling rock. It makes zero mathematical sense if your goal is early financial independence.
Okay, the second false asset is much more contentious: the financed advanced degree. We have been drilled since kindergarten that higher education is the ultimate key to wealth. To call an MBA or a law degree a false asset feels almost heretical.
We have to view this strictly through the lens of our specific timeline. If a person plans to work in a corporate environment for 40 years, taking out $100,000 in loans for an advanced degree might eventually yield a positive return on investment.
Though even that is increasingly debatable with how crazy tuition costs have gotten.
Very true. But our stated goal here is permanent financial freedom in under 10 years.
The timeline mismatch is the killer. If I take out $150,000 in debt at age 25, and I want to be financially independent by 35, I only have 10 years to amortize that massive capital outlay.
Right. Unless that degree immediately quadruples your income and you save every single penny of the difference, the math simply doesn't work.
The debt servicing acts as a massive anchor, right as I'm trying to swim to the surface. For early wealth builders, hyper-specific skill acquisition and performance-based roles often provide a much faster and cheaper path to a high income than a generalized master's degree.
Absolutely. But the most deeply ingrained false asset, the one that makes up the bulk of American middle-class wealth, is the financed primary residence, the traditional single-family home.
Okay, this is where the traditional financial advisors usually start hyperventilating. Real estate is universally lauded as the foundation of generational wealth. How does the blueprint justify calling home ownership a bad idea?
It requires a strict definition of what an asset actually is, separating human emotion from pure cash flow. Borrowing heavily from Robert Kiyosaki's core philosophy in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, an asset is something that puts money into your pocket every single month, regardless of whether you work or not.
And a liability takes money out of your pocket.
Precisely. When you purchase a single-family home with a 30-year mortgage, what is the cash flow reality?
Well, cash is leaving.
Every single month, cash leaves your account to pay the principal, the interest, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the HOA fees, and the inevitable maintenance, the new roof, the broken HVAC, the landscaping. The house is a consumption item. It consumes your liquidity.
But the pushback is always, but you are building equity. It's forced savings. And yes, historically, real estate appreciates,
Yeah.
but equity is trapped wealth. You cannot buy groceries with home equity. You cannot pay your utility bill with home equity.
Exactly. If you want to access that wealth, you either have to sell the house, which incurs massive transaction costs like broker fees, and leaves you needing a new place to live anyway, or you take out a home equity line of credit.
Which just means going further into debt and increasing your monthly liability.
Right. The vast majority of American net worth is locked inside primary residences and tax-advantaged retirement accounts like 401k. It is paper wealth.
Explain the danger of paper wealth.
A person might have a net worth of $500,000 on a spreadsheet, but if 400,000 of that is trapped in home equity and retirement accounts they can't touch without penalty for decades, they have zero actual freedom today. They are utterly dependent on their next paycheck to maintain the illusion of wealth.
They are essentially living in a very beautiful, very expensive prison of their own making. The guy renting a modest apartment who has $50,000 of liquid cash in a brokerage account actually has more autonomy and leverage than the house-poor homeowner.
100%.
So if the single-family home is a trap that destroys your monthly cash flow, but renting forever leaves you exposed to inflation and rising housing costs, what is the structural solution? Where are you actually supposed to live?
This is where we transition from defensive capital accumulation to aggressive wealth generation. We utilize what is arguably the most powerful lever in the entire blueprint, the strategy that bridges the gap from $25,000 to a six-figure net worth incredibly rapidly. House hacking.
House hacking. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot on real estate forums like BiggerPockets, but the mechanics of it are incredibly elegant.
It's brilliant.
Instead of buying a single-family consumption item, you purchase a small, multifamily property, a duplex, a triplex, or a four-unit building. You occupy one of the units as your primary residence, and you lease out the remaining units to tenants.
And the strategic advantage of this lies heavily in the financing. In the U.S., the government heavily incentivizes homeownership. If you are an owner-occupant, meaning you actually live in the building, you can access financing structures like an FHA loan, which allows you to acquire the asset with a down payment as low as 3.5%.
Wow. And if you tried to buy that same duplex strictly as an investment property, what would a bank demand?
Typically 20 to 25% down.
So you are utilizing government-backed leverage to acquire a commercial-grade income asset for the price of a used Honda Civic.
Yes.
Let's walk through the math on this because it highlights exactly why this accelerates wealth faster than almost anything else. The book presents a case study of a median earner named Joe. Let's break down Joe's deal.
Okay, so Joe has diligently saved his $25,000 runway. He finds a solid, functional duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood for $240,000. Utilizing an owner-occupant loan, his out-of-pocket down payment is roughly $10,500.
Okay, totally manageable. And when you factor in interest rates, property taxes, and insurance, let's say his total monthly mortgage payment sits at about $1,500. Now, if this were a single-family home, Joe would be bleeding $1,500 a month out of his paycheck.
Right. But Joe lives in Unit A, and he rents out Unit B for $1,200 a month.
Boom. Instantly, Joe's out-of-pocket housing expense drops from $1,500 to $300.
But the wealth accumulation goes much, much deeper than just the rent offset. That $1,500 mortgage payment includes principal paydown. His tenant's rent is effectively buying the building for him month by month.
The tenant is building his equity.
Exactly. Furthermore, real estate serves as a hedge against inflation. The property value tends to rise over time, and Joe gets 100% of the appreciation on the total asset value, despite only putting down a tiny fraction of the cost.
The ROI calculations on this are staggering. When you combine the cash he is saving on his own rent, the equity his tenant is building for him, the tax depreciation benefits he gets, and modest appreciation, Joe's net worth increases by over $20,000 in the first year alone.
All from an initial investment of $10,500. That is nearly a 200% return on investment in year one.
And if you project the compounding effect of this decision over 30 years, comparing Joe to a lifelong renter or a traditional single-family homeowner, the divergence is monumental, isn't it?
It's hard to even wrap your head around. The data suggests the house hacker will accumulate roughly $1.5 million more in wealth than the lifelong renter. But more surprisingly, the house hacker builds over $850,000 more wealth than the traditional homeowner.
Almost $1 million in excess wealth, simply because he was willing to share a wall with a neighbor for a few years.
Yep.
The analogy that always comes to mind here is the underlying architecture of Airbnb. Airbnb didn't spend billions building new hotels. They recognized that millions of people had underutilized space, an empty bedroom, a finished basement, and they built a platform to monetize that friction.
That's a fantastic comparison.
House hacking is applying that exact macroeconomic model to your personal life. You're monetizing the underutilized space of a multifamily property to turn your largest structural liability into a revenue-generating asset.
It is brilliant, but we have to be honest, it is not without significant friction.
Yeah.
The math is undeniable, but the execution requires asking 4 highly critical questions before you just blindly deploy capital into a property. First, is it affordable?
Because leverage is a double-edged sword.
Right. Even with low down payments, you cannot over-leverage. If the property sits vacant for 2 months because you can't find a tenant, you must have the cash reserves to cover the entire mortgage without panic.
And that's exactly where the runway we built in Phase 1 comes into play. You have the buffer. Question 2, though, is where most people tap out. Are you willing to live there?
This is the psychological crucible of the entire strategy. It requires a massive suppression of your own ego. Consider the social dynamics. Your peers, who are making the exact same median salary as you, are leveraging themselves to the hilt to buy beautiful, newly constructed homes in pristine suburban cul-de-sacs.
They have the granite countertops, the 2-car garages, the manicured lawns. They look wealthy on Instagram.
Meanwhile, you are buying a slightly older duplex in a transitional blue-collar neighborhood. You are living in a smaller footprint. You might hear your tenant's television through the wall at night. If their sink backs up at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, you are the one going over there with a wrench. Your ego takes a massive, visible hit in the eyes of society.
But that discomfort is the exact price of admission for financial velocity. You are trading short-term social status for long-term structural dominance.
Precisely. While your peers are stressing over rising property taxes and literally praying for a 3% raise just to cover their lifestyle creep, your housing costs are effectively zero. You are banking thousands of dollars in surplus cash every single month.
So powerful. Okay, question 3 evaluates the risk profile. Will it cash flow if you move out?
This is vital. A house hack must fundamentally operate as a viable investment property. If your life circumstances change, you get married, you take a job in another state, you simply outgrow the space, can you move out, rent both units at market rate, and still generate a positive cash yield after the mortgage and maintenance reserves?
If the math only works while you are living there providing free property management, it is a speculative liability, not a true asset.
Spot on. And finally, question 4. Is there a reasonable chance for appreciation? You aren't banking solely on it, but you want to buy in an area with upward economic momentum.
Look for neighborhoods on the path of progress, right? Areas where cities are investing in infrastructure, where new coffee shops and breweries are starting to open.
Yes. If you can confidently navigate those 4 parameters, you have essentially solved the largest financial burden of the human experience. With housing costs neutralized and other expenses optimized, the only mathematical variable left to manipulate is the income itself.
Right. We've compressed the lifestyle cost to the floor. The $25,000 runway is intact in the bank. We're living for almost nothing. The savings rate is astronomical compared to the average citizen. But frugality does have a floor. You can only cut so much before you are fundamentally damaging your quality of life. Earning, however, theoretically has no ceiling.
Exactly.
To accelerate from a net worth of $100,000 into the millions, you have to pour high-octane fuel onto the fire. But the traditional corporate structure is designed to limit that fuel.
The traditional W-2 salaried path is a trap of predictability. The systemic issue with salaried employment is the complete decoupling of value creation from compensation.
Explain.
If you are an exceptionally competent employee who streamlines a process and saves your department $200,000 a year, your reward is not $200,000. Your reward is a standard 3 to 5% annual merit increase and perhaps a nice plastic plaque for your desk.
And a 3% raise in a standard inflationary environment is essentially a pay cut. You are taking on more responsibility and generating more value for the shareholders, but your purchasing power remains stagnant. It guarantees that you will be working for 40 years.
To compress a 40-year career into 10 years, you must pivot into environments of scalable income. You need to position yourself in roles where your compensation is directly tied to the revenue you generate or the unique value you provide.
What does that look like practically?
This typically means transitioning into performance-based pay structures. Things like enterprise sales, roles with heavy commission structures, or taking positions in early-stage tech companies that offer significant equity packages.
Where if the company wins, you win.
Right. Alternatively, it means acquiring hyper-specialized technical skills like advanced software engineering, AI architecture, or specific medical technical skills where the talent pool is so constrained that the market is forced to pay a massive premium for your time.
But wait, earlier we established that the average person is too exhausted to out-hustle the market, and quitting a stable job to go 100% commission sounds like absolute financial suicide. The anxiety of not knowing if you can pay your rent next month is paralyzing.
It is paralyzing if you have no safety net, but context is everything here. You are no longer the median earner living paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
You possess a $25,000 runway, and your living expenses are functionally zero because of the house hack. The structural anxiety has been engineered completely out of your life. You have literally purchased the right to take a massive asymmetric risk with your career.
The runway acts as a trampoline. If you take a high-risk, commission-only tech sales job and you fail miserably for the first 6 months, you aren't facing eviction. You simply draw down a small portion of your runway, recalibrate your skills, and keep pushing until the pipeline closes. The downside is capped, but the upside is infinite.
Exactly. But for those who are not ready to detonate their corporate career path entirely, the blueprint offers a brilliant alternative mechanism for scaling income: the synergistic side hustle.
I love this concept, and this solves the core problem of exhaustion we talked about at the top of the show.
Right, because modern side hustle culture often encourages extreme inefficiency. A person who works as a corporate financial analyst all day will go home and try to launch a drop-shipping business selling custom pet apparel.
Which requires them to learn digital marketing, supply chain logistics, customer service, and website design from absolute scratch, all while operating on low energy at night. The friction is enormous, and the overlap in skill sets is zero.
Synergistic scaling is about compounding your existing leverage. Your side hustle should be a direct extension of your primary professional skills. If you are that corporate financial analyst, you understand complex modeling, cash flow projections, and tax strategy. Your side hustle should be offering freelance bookkeeping, CFO consulting, or financial modeling to local small businesses or startups.
The beauty of this is the feedback loop. You're utilizing a skill you have already mastered, meaning you can immediately charge a premium hourly rate as a consultant. You aren't starting at zero. Furthermore, the diverse problems you solve for your consulting clients make you a sharper, more dynamic analyst at your day job, which increases your value there.
You are getting paid twice to improve the same core competency.
And this emphasis on relentless skill improvement leads directly into what Trench defines as the CEO mindset for self-education. The traditional middle-class mindset assumes that education basically terminates the day you receive your university diploma.
Right, that learning is over.
But wealth philosophy requires continuous cognitive upgrades. The blueprint lays down a very specific challenge here. Read one business, finance, or personal development book every single week. It sounds simple, but the compounding effect of that habit over time is staggering.
The text actually quotes business philosopher Brian Tracy on this, who noted that 1 hour per day of focused study will place you at the top of your field within 3 years, and within 5 years, you will be a national authority. Reading one book a week equates to roughly an hour of reading a day.
Think about the data density of a well-researched book. An author spends 10 years making mistakes, building businesses, analyzing markets, and refining their psychology. They distill a decade of hard-won wisdom into a 200-page manuscript.
It's an incredible bargain.
For $20 and a few hours of your time, you get to download a decade of their experience directly into your brain. If you do that 50 times a year, you are aggregating the cognitive power of the world's top operators.
You build a mental monopoly. When you combine the risk tolerance provided by your runway, the low overhead of your house hack, and a brain that is continuously processing new market strategies and negotiation tactics, your earning potential scales exponentially. You become an apex competitor in your field.
Which brings us to the final summit, the inflection point where human capital transforms into permanent generational wealth. We've traversed the runway phase, we've stabilized housing, and we've scaled income to the point where massive amounts of surplus cash are being generated every single month.
The machine is humming.
The question now is capital deployment. How do we allocate this cash to build a machine that permanently replaces our wage income?
We rely on the fundamental mathematics of the financial freedom equation. The formula is elegantly simple. Assets multiplied by return must be greater than your lifestyle.
Let's define the variables for the listener. Assets represent your invested capital, the cash you have deployed into income-producing vehicles. Return is the annualized yield or growth rate of those investments. And lifestyle is the total cost of your annual existence.
When the yield from your assets consistently exceeds the cost of your lifestyle, you have achieved absolute financial independence. You are no longer required to trade time for money.
It's game over. You win.
Notice how the previous stages of the blueprint systematically attacked this equation. By practicing strategic frugality and house hacking, you aggressively drove down the lifestyle variable, making the finish line drastically closer. By scaling your income synergistically, you accelerated the accumulation of the assets variable. The final step is optimizing the return.
To optimize that return without taking on catastrophic risk, the blueprint outlines 7 core tenets of investing. We won't exhaustively debate all 7 today, but we must highlight the non-negotiable rules. Tenet 1 is the golden rule of wealth preservation. Never say the principle.
The principle is the engine of the wealth machine. If you visualize your investments as a goose that lays golden eggs, the returns are the eggs. You can consume the eggs to fund your lifestyle. But the moment you start selling off the principal to buy a luxury car or fund a fancy vacation, you are literally butchering the goose. The compounding effect is shattered, and the wealth generation permanently halts.
The other core tenets build on this. You must reinvest returns during the accumulation phase to let compound interest work. You acknowledge that capital is required to play the game. You recognize that your effort only matters if you actually control the investment, like a piece of real estate. And you understand that hyper-specific investments, like upgrading your own home's energy efficiency, often yield the highest guaranteed returns.
Oh, crucial.
But the tenet that absolutely shatters conventional financial advice is the deconstruction of the diversification myth.
This one makes people very uncomfortable. If you sit down with a standard financial planner at a major institution, the very first thing they will tell you is to diversify your portfolio. Spread your money across large-cap stocks, small-cap stocks, international equities, emerging markets, government bonds, and corporate debt.
The narrative is that diversification protects you from risk.
And it does, which is why questioning it feels reckless to most people.
It feels wrong.
It is not reckless if you understand the difference between wealth preservation and wealth creation. Diversification is a phenomenal strategy for someone who already possesses $10 million and wants to ensure they never lose it. It protects wealth. But it is a mathematically terrible strategy for building wealth rapidly.
Let's run a scenario. If a young professional has aggregated their first $20,000 to invest, and they follow traditional advice, they might put $5,000 in an S&P 500 index, $5,000 in international markets, $5,000 in low-yield bonds, and $5,000 in a gold ETF.
By spreading their limited capital across asset classes with historically low or inversely correlated returns, they are mathematically capping their upside potential. They guarantee a slow, mediocre growth rate. If your goal is to compress decades of wealth building into a few years, you must concentrate your capital into high-growth, appreciating assets. You concentrate to build wealth, you diversify to preserve it once you've won the game.
For the median earner following this blueprint, that concentration typically takes 2 forms: acquiring more cash-flowing real estate using the operational knowledge gained from house hacking, or concentrating heavily into broad market U.S. index funds. And the blueprint is brutally definitive on the topic of the stock market. Picking individual stocks is a statistical waste of time.
The hubris of the retail investor is believing they can outsmart Wall Street. The modern stock market is dominated by high-frequency trading algorithms, teams of PhD analysts, and institutional insiders who possess information asymmetry.
The playing field is not level.
Not at all. The data is overwhelming. The vast majority of actively managed mutual funds fail to beat the benchmark S&P 500 index over a 10-year period. If professionals working 80 hours a week with unlimited resources cannot pick winning stocks consistently, the average person sitting on their couch reading Yahoo Finance has zero mathematical edge.
The analogy I love for this is trying to profit off a massive sporting event. Picking individual stocks is like standing outside the stadium with a cooler, trying to guess which fans want to buy a water bottle. It is incredibly high effort, it consumes all your attention, and the return is utterly immaterial to your life.
Huh, that's perfect.
Buying a low-cost, broad market index fund is like purchasing the stadium itself. You don't care which specific team wins or loses. You get a cut of every ticket, every hot dog, and every broadcast right. You capture the aggregate growth of human productivity effortlessly.
And Warren Buffett has been preaching this for decades. By utilizing index funds, you match the market's historical return with near zero time commitment, freeing up your cognitive bandwidth to focus on what actually moves the needle, which is scaling your active income and acquiring more real estate.
But holding a concentrated position in equities requires a massive psychological reframing of how we view market mechanics. We have to separate the concept of volatility from the concept of risk.
Traditional financial media conflates the two constantly. They look at a market correction where the Dow drops 1,000 points and they scream that the market is too risky.
They are reacting to volatility. Volatility is simply the frequency and magnitude of price fluctuations over a short time horizon. Yes, in any given month or year, the stock market is highly volatile. It will crash. It will correct.
But risk, true risk, is the probability of a permanent loss of capital. If you look at a 50-year or 100-year chart of the U.S. stock market, despite world wars, global pandemics, massive inflation, and the dot-com bust, the trajectory is relentlessly up and to the right. Human innovation drives corporate profits, which drives equity values.
So volatility is just the turbulence on a cross-country flight. It is uncomfortable. You might spill your drink, but it doesn't mean the plane is crashing. Risk is jumping out of the plane mid-flight by panic selling your assets at the bottom of the market.
Precisely. And this is where the entire blueprint harmonizes. If you obey Tenet 1 and never sell your principal, short-term volatility is completely irrelevant to you. In fact, during the accumulation phase of your life, you actively desire market crashes.
That sounds insane to the average person. Why would I want my portfolio value to drop 30%?
Because you are a net buyer of assets. You have massive surplus cash flow every month from your high-income job and your non-existent housing costs. When the market crashes, the businesses that make up the economy are suddenly on sale at a 30% discount.
It's Black Friday for stocks.
Exactly. You get to acquire premium dividend-producing assets for pennies on the dollar. A market crash is only a crisis for people who are over-leveraged or who are forced to sell their assets to fund their lifestyle.
And because you have a bulletproof financial runway and low structural overhead, you are never forced to sell. You are immune to the panic. You just keep buying the stadium while everyone else is running for the exits.
It's an incredibly empowering position to be in.
When you step back and look at this entire architecture, it shifts from being a series of financial tips to a unified theory of personal sovereignty. Let's synthesize the blueprint for the listener.
Let's do it.
First, you stop the bleeding by identifying and eliminating false assets. You reject the finance cars and the cash-draining single-family homes that trap your equity. Second, you aggressively audit the big three lifestyle expenses, optimizing your geography to destroy the commute and learning to manage your own physical environment to bypass expensive labor.
Check.
Third, you channel that retained capital into a $25,000 runway, buying yourself the ultimate luxury, the ability to take risk without fear of ruin.
The seed money.
Fourth, you deploy that capital into a house hack, leveraging favorable financing to completely neutralize your largest monthly expense and turn it into an income stream.
The most powerful lever.
Fifth, operating from a position of absolute security, you pivot your career towards scalable, performance-based income and synergistic side hustles, while aggressively upgrading your mental software through relentless reading.
The CEO mindset.
And finally, you concentrate this massive influx of cash into high-yield, wealth-building vehicles like real estate and broad index funds, ignoring the noise of stock picking and embracing market volatility as an opportunity to buy assets on sale.
The mathematics of this progression are completely sound. It is not dependent on luck, it does not require inherited wealth, and it does not rely on speculative crypto gambles. It requires a suppression of ego, a willingness to endure temporary social discomfort, and a ruthless commitment to capital efficiency. But for the median earner willing to execute the plan, achieving a net worth that generates perpetual freedom in under 10 years is highly probable.
It is the blueprints to the sports car. It gets you across the country with your youth intact. But as we close this out, I want to pivot from the mechanics to the philosophy. We spent the last hour explaining exactly how to build the machine. The deeper question is, why build it at all? Why endure the discomfort of house hacking or the rigor of reading 50 books a year just to escape a system that most people seem perfectly content to participate in?
Because we have to question the fundamental premise of the system itself. The concept of retiring at 65 is not a biological imperative. It is not a natural law of human development. It is an arbitrary systemic construct that was essentially invented in the early 20th century to manage labor forces.
It was designed for an industrial economy that needed humans to act as cogs in a machine.
Exactly. The modern consumer economy functions smoothly only if millions of highly capable, intelligent individuals remain financially precarious enough that they must continue trading their most productive years for a biweekly paycheck. The system requires you to remain on the treadmill, financing cars, and upgrading televisions so you keep producing and conceiving.
It's a self-perpetuating loop of consumption and labor.
Therefore, achieving true financial freedom in your 30s or 40s is not merely a personal financial victory. It is not just about accumulating enough capital to sit on a beach and drink margaritas. In fact, most people who achieve this level of autonomy find that lifestyle incredibly boring after a month.
You'd go crazy.
Right. Financial freedom is a fundamental opt-out. It is a quiet structural rejection of a system designed to extract your energy. You aren't just buying your time back, you are reclaiming your sovereignty.
You are stepping off the treadmill and unplugging the machine.
So the question we want to leave you, the listener, with today is not about spreadsheets or index funds. It is about human potential. If you did not have to spend the next 30 years of your life trading your peak cognitive hours just to maintain your baseline survival, what would you do?
It's a huge question.
If you reclaimed the next 3 decades, what companies would you build? What art would you create? What massive, complex problems in your local community or on a global scale could you solve if you were not perpetually exhausted by the 9-to-5 grind? Achieving financial freedom is the ultimate privilege because it grants you the power to direct your own life's work without permission.
That is the real American dream. Not a house in the suburbs and a gold watch at 65, but the absolute autonomy to figure out what you are truly capable of when survival is no longer the objective. The math works. The blueprint is right in front of you. It's going to take some serious sweat equity in the garage to put that engine together, and you might have to endure a few years of driving a beat-up car while your friends finance luxury SUVs. But once you turn the key, the open road is yours, decades before anyone else even sees the horizon. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.